Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and I hope that you all must be doing great. So let's start with the analysis video for 7th of August 2023. So firstly, we are having this advertisement from Rajasthan that it now becomes a state with 50 districts. So basically, if you're obviously preparing for the Rajasthan civil services examination, it becomes important, obviously, the understanding of the map and creation of new districts and their location, geographical location surrounding which all districts, that is important. But from the perspective of UPSC civil services examination, what is important is what is the process behind creating new districts in a particular state. So you need to find out about the process behind this. Moving forward, we see amid the fresh clashes, we see ITLF leaders to meet the Union Home Minister. So Home Ministry has asked Mizoram Chief Minister to facilitate one-to-one talks with the tribal leaders. So we are seeing violence again happening in Manipur, and Kuki People's Alliance, it withdraws the support to the NDA in Manipur Assembly, and 10 CAPF companies have been airlifted to the state. So when we talk about the role of the Central Armed Police Forces, despite their presence, they're not able to tackle the situation. They're not able to prevent violence in the state. So the actual ground reality is obviously far way different from what we are able to see through the newspapers. Then, this we have already seen 508 Amrit Bharat stations would be revamped, and it has been launched by the Prime Minister. So, relevant nuances have already raised up in the previous session, so it's a repeat. So, this is an important topic that building strong roots for STEM. So, STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So after the school programs, it makes STEM subjects interesting by offering hands-on experiences. You get practical applications and exposure to the advanced technologies. So basically how it can be strengthened, and obviously you need to be clear with the scenario of STEM in India, basically women participation, and again, the global picture and position of India. So this article is over the violence which happened in the new district, Mewat. And the recent violence in new district of Haryana, it is not far from the national capital. It has followed a familiar template. So religious events, they may once they have been occasion for affirming a sense of community through the shared pity, but they are now incomplete without a brazen display of aggression. So cultural disdain, it's an open collusion. Obviously, some political interests also are behind this, and state power, it is now an accessory to an aggressive program of the religious conquest, not a countervailing force that upholds the constitutional principles. So here it is basically talking about the history of Nu. And again, this is not so important. This incidence is not so important, but when you talk about the communal violence, hate speech, so that in broader sense is important. And recently we also saw Supreme Court coming in and directing the center and the states to basically come forward and give the reasons why they're unable to prevent such instances in different regions. So bureaucracy as prosecutor and judge. So the controversial Jan Vishwas Act 2022 it was recently enacted into law by the parliament. It has been touted by the government as a landmark piece of legislation which is aimed at improving ease of doing business in India. So aim behind is to improve the ease of doing business, and that is either by decriminalizing or making compoundable offense across 42 legislations. सो बेसिकली अगेन ये हम पहले ले चुके हैं, इसको डिस्कस कर चुके हैं कि कहीं ना कहीं इसमें भी डाइल्यूशन करने की कोशिश की जा रही है दैट basically the culprits they will not have to go through the criminal law and criminal investigation process, so it is being in a way made compoundable. So fine print which has been received little media attention, it is that while legislation it has mostly replaced the criminal imprisonment with penalties. So earlier जो criminal investigation होती against the culprits and the criminals, so उसको replace कर दिया गया है with penalties, मतलब आप fine pay करोगे and you'll be free. तो कहीं ना कहीं obviously this would, हम इसको नहीं बोल सकते कि this is in a way improving the ease of doing business, because यहाँ पे obviously law and order versus ease of doing business वाली dilemma आती है. So this act, the Jan Vishwas Act, it amends the Environment Protection Act को amend किया जा रहा है through this. Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act को amend किया है to replace imprisonment as a punishment for certain offences with the penalties of rupees 15 lakh. So penalties impose कर दी गई है, it replaces the imprisonment punishment जो पहले थी. So basically, kahin na kahin ye act, it is allowing the bureaucrats which are in charge of enforcing the law to also conduct an inquiry and impose the statutory penalty on a finding of wrongdoing is constitutionally suspect. So bureaucracy का main काम क्या है? It is implementation and not to conduct inquiry या फिर basically impose statutory, मतलब अगर ये provision है तो they just have to make sure कि it is being implemented. So उनको in charge बनाना of enforcing the law to conduct inquiry, that is basically coming under question. So separation of powers का जो principle है, that is in a way getting violated. So constitution, it does not mandate separation of powers between the judiciary and the executive. Read it carefully. यहाँ बोल रहे हैं constitution is not mandating separation of powers between judiciary and executive. Article 50 directs the state to achieve it in due time. So separation, it was not achieved until several years after constitution came into effect, because the criminal magistracy head was part of the executive at independence. So gradually we saw separation and more clarity at this front. And it took till approximately अगर हम 1970s तक की बात करें for several state legislatures to effect separation of power at the level of criminal magistracy through laws such as the West Bengal Separation of the Judicial and the Executive Functions Act, which separated the roles of the judicial and the executive magistrates in the Criminal Procedure Code. So earlier, this obviously judicial and executive magistrates was the powers rested in single person. So this is basically the main concern around this act. So here we have the topic that is India's sugar surplus leading to a crisis or not. So let's understand this in more detail. So how are sugarcane farmers, they are impacted by the excess sugar production? Obviously अगर supply ज़्यादा होगा तो prices fall ही होंगे, जो अगर हम बात करें market prices of the sugarcane. So what measures can be taken to prevent India's agricultural sector from collapsing due to the sugar surplus? And how have this excessive sugarcane subsidies also affected India's competitiveness in the global sugar market? and what are the implications of sugarcane over cultivation. So यहाँ पे बहुत सारे dimensions लेके आए गए हैं. So let's understand them. So India, it became the world's top sugar producer in the year 2021-22, surpassing Brazil. And however, जो extensive use of resources का in sugar production, that is depleting rapidly, leading to potential crisis in the future. Like आने वाले आज के टाइम में तो हम surplus की बात कर रहे हैं, but आने वाले टाइम में we can also see crisis coming because of depleting resources. जो sugar production के लिए resources हमें required है, जिनकी वजह से हम आज we could overtake Brazil. Because of that depletion, future में we can also face the situation of prices also. So that is also one of the possibilities. So over cultivation of जो sugarcane किया जा रहा है, उसकी वजह से sugar surplus की situation create हुई and high exports which is impacting the groundwater negatively. Obviously अगर sugar surplus हो रहा है तो आप उसको domestic market में जो price fall हो सकता है उसको कैसे prevent कर सकते हो? One way is to export that surplus या some amount of that surplus. And अगेन जब हम ओवर कल्टिवेशन ऑफ शुगर केन की बात कर रहे हैं तो ग्राउंड वाटर को भी नेगेटिवली इम्पैक्ट कर रहा है बिकॉज अगेन शुगर केन की बात करो राइस की बात करो तो they require intensive water when it comes to their cultivation. So to prevent this risk of agricultural collapse, addressing groundwater overuse in the sugar industry is very crucial thing. So why was there excess sugarcane production? So India, we are the world's largest consumer of sugar also, and we thus उसकी वजह से हमें जो produce करना पड़ता है enough to meet the huge domestic demand. So because हम इतना ज़्यादा we are the one of the world's largest sugar consumers, so that's why we want to ensure कि domestic production इतना ज़्यादा रहे कि we don't have to depend upon the imports. But जो excess production हुआ है, that is because of the policies and measures that makes farmers favor the sugarcane cultivation. So obviously farmers would be looking or they would be attracted and more interested in the policies जहाँ पे उनको ज़्यादा फायदा हो, the ones which are more economically viable for them. So that is also one of the reason why we are seeing excess production of sugarcane. So central government, it offers a fair and remunerative price scheme है. जैसे MSP होती है, so sugarcane के लिए there is a different price which is called the FRP. जिसके अंडर एक मिनिमम प्राइस जो शुगर मिल्स फार्मर्स को देती हैं, इंश्योरिंग कि फार्मर्स दे ऑलवेज गेट द फेयर प्रॉफिट्स फॉर देयर क्रॉप. तो जैसे MSP में इट इज द गवर्नमेंट विच इज गिविंग दैट प्राइस टू द फार्मर्स. FRP के केस में जो फार्मर्स हैं वो अपना शुगर मिल्स को सेल करते हैं, तो जो शुगर मिल्स के ओनर्स होते हैं दे गिव दिस अमाउंट टू द फार्मर्स. एंड स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स एक डिफरेंट प्राइस ऑफर करते हैं. एंड इसके अलावा वी सी कि स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स दे आर आल्सो ऑफरिंग हेवी सब्सिडीज टू इंसेंटिवाइज शुगर केन कल्टिवेशन. सो ऑब्वियसली अगर रॉ मटेरियल्स चीपली अवेलेबल होंगे फार्मर्स को तो फार्मर्स वुड बी गोइंग फॉर दैट ऑप्शन ओनली. सो सब्सिडीज की वजह से जो रॉ मटेरियल्स की कॉस्ट है वो कम हो जाती है. दैट इज अनदर प्रॉब्लम. एंड इसकी वजह से we are seeing surplus. And in fact Brazil, Australia, Guatemala, they filed a complaint with the WTO also against India for violating the international trade rules by offering excessive export subsidies and domestic support to the farmers to outcompete other countries in the global sugar market. So this is also one of the outcomes जब हमने यहाँ पे बात करी कि कैसे subsidies, how they are impacting the competitiveness of India's sugar in the global market. So WTO issue भी है इसके around. Countries जो involved हैं, it includes Brazil, Australia and Guatemala. So जो ruling थी that remained against India, and India also lost its appeal as well. So that's there. And so इस issue को address करने के लिए क्या efforts लिए गए हैं? So to deal with the sugar surplus, Indian government it has considered diverting it to the production of ethanol. मतलब आप अगर अब बाय प्रोडक्ट्स की बात करो तो आप इसको इथेनॉल प्रोडक्शन में यूज कर सकते हो. एक ऑर्गेनिक कंपाउंड है which is made by fermenting the sugarcane molasses, तो जिसको आप शुगर भी बोल सकते हो. So एक तरीके से एक active ingredient है in the alcoholic beverages, and also it is used in chemicals and cosmetics industries. So ethanol kinds of it acts like a raw material for these industries. So वहाँ पे we can divert the excess production. And transport sector में obviously we're talking about ethanol blended petrol. So it reduces the harmful emissions like the carbon monoxide and various hydrocarbons from the vehicles. So government has also launched this ethanol blended petrol program in 2003 to reduce the crude oil imports and curtail these greenhouse gases emissions. And we had this target of achieving this blending rate of 5%, but target was set for 2025. It is 20% of blending the petrol with 20% ethanol. So the target year is 2025. Then how does excessive sugarcane cultivation it is impacting groundwater? Obviously, we know that sugarcane it requires a lot of water during cultivation. So excessive अगर cultivation हमें मिलेगी तो excessive groundwater extraction and exploitation भी देखने को मिलेगा. So because it's a water intensive crop, जब हम sugarcane की बात करें, rice की बात करें specifically, then को पता होना चाहिए कि कौन सी ऐसी states है which are the major growers of sugarcane. Then again, अब इस solution का जब हम ground water excess exploitation या overuse की बात करते हैं तो इसके लिए क्या solution है? So environmental implications हैं excess sugarcane production की. Here, a more substantial way it would be to access and then correct the incentives that skew in favor of the sugarcane over other crops. So introducing a fair and comprehensive subsidy schemes should be considered for a variety of other crops also. मतलब sugarcane के लिए ही क्यों आप subsidy provide कर रहे हो, बाकी crops के लिए भी आपको provide करनी चाहिए ताकि there is a balance and diversity when it comes to cultivation of different crops. And उसके अलावा we need to prevent these monocultural practices. We need to ensure equitable income distribution as well. So अगर farmers के पास wider options available रहेंगे तो they would not only shift or they would not only rely upon sugarcane cultivation or to that matter even rice cultivation. And apart from this, we can complement it with environmentally responsible sugarcane cultivation practices that prioritizes the groundwater. Like we can use drip irrigation to tackle the issue in the long run. So in the drip irrigation, water is allowed to drip slowly, but directly to the roots of the sugarcane plants, which reduces the water consumption by up to 70% relative to the current flood irrigation method जो हम use करते हैं. So 70% of less water can be used through drip irrigation technique. Then concerted efforts to adopt cleaner practices like rainwater harvesting it can be considered, wastewater treatment plants, canal irrigation networks that will also help in minimizing the stress on the groundwater reservoirs. So as India continues to become more of a global frontrunner in the agricultural sector, it must put sustainability at the center. So we need to work towards sustainable agriculture. So because of the rising food prices, it may undo the recent respite from inflation. So this has been a concern because we are also saying key food inflation jo hai, that is seasonal in nature. But again, every year during the same time period, we go through this situation. And we were seeing key inflation was moderating, but now because even the concerns related to the monsoon, irregular rainfalls, so उसकी वजह से फूड इन्फ्लेशन इट इज राइजिंग, तो कहीं ना कहीं ओवरऑल इन्फ्लेशन के ऊपर भी इम्पैक्ट जरूर होगा. एंड अगेन जब हम आरबीआई की या मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी कमेटी की रेपो रेट चेंजेस की बात करते हैं तो वहां पे भी वी आर हैविंग दिस डिलेमा बिटवीन ग्रोथ वर्सेस इन्फ्लेशन मॉडरेशन. तो उसमें भी अगर इन्फ्लेशन इंक्रीज होगा तो आने वाले टाइम में इट इज पॉसिबल कि आरबीआई वुड बी गोइंग अहेड विद मोर इंक्रीज इन द रेपो रेट. सो अगर रेपो रेट और इंक्रीज किया जाएगा नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट ग्रोथ पे होगा, क्योंकि अगर रेपो रेट इंक्रीज हो रहा है तो जो कॉस्ट ऑफ बोरोइंग है फॉर द इन्वेस्टर्स वो इंक्रीज होगी. तो इन्वेस्टमेंट्स अगर कम होगी तो ऑब्वियसली ग्रोथ भी कम देखने को मिलेगी. So that's how all these things are interrelated. तो प्रोजेक्ट चीता की अगर हम सक्सेस की बात करें या फिर जो हमें चैलेंजेस देखने को मिल रहे हैं, तो हाउ वी कैन बेसिकली नाउ एड्रेस दैट प्रॉब्लम, या क्या सोल्यूशन है। सो मध्य प्रदेश की जो स्ट्रैटेजी है फॉर द टाइगर्स, तो वो स्ट्रैटेजी अगर हम रेप्लिकेट करें इन द प्रोजेक्ट चीता, तो वो कहीं ना कहीं हमें हेल्प कर सकती है। सो स्टेट्स प्लान ऑफ एक्टिवली moving the tigers and their prey within the state, that can be one thing to balance predator and the prey population. So that is a key indicator of the success of the Project Tiger. And it may help form a viable cheetah population in the national park in the state that has already seen death of 6 cheetahs translocated to India so far. So 5% of the birds जो इंडिया में है, they are endemic. Endemic मतलब they are only found in India. That's according to the Zoological Survey of India's publication. Coming to the Mint newspaper, so here we have gone through this decision by the government to curb the imports, IT imports. So are we talking about coming back of license Raj in another form, or you need to like choose between two things, either go for Make in India or license Raj. If you want to import, then you need to have a proper license for importing these IT products. Or else the other option that is left with you is to make, to produce and manufacture within India. So yes, it would be helping the domestic manufacturers, the domestic players. And what is important is, are we in such a position that we can manufacture at that scale, at that level, which is required, which can fulfill the domestic demands? And do we have that environment, do we have that basic infrastructure at the local level which is required, which acts as a prerequisite for that large scale level of production? Obviously, apart from this, other benefits that you can think about is the employment generation. And we talk about that manufacturing sector, it holds a lot of potential for growth, and that needs to be the focus 25 years down the line as well, because we see that services sector has already achieved the saturation level when we talk about its contribution to the GDP or the potential of generating employment and jobs. So manufacturing sector is one of the main focus areas going forward. Now coming to Financial Express newspaper, now we see, so FTA with UK, एक तो broader topic है free trade agreements का, how much India has basically gained through the FTAs जो हम already sign कर चुके हैं, चाहे आप जापान की बात करो या कोरिया की बात करो. And right now we are also seeing increase in the number of FTAs that India wishes to sign with different countries. कुछ ऐसे countries है जिसके साथ we have already successfully signed that agreement, and few countries like UK is there where talks they are still going on. तो क्या how firstly you need to know about the difference. पहले जो FTAs थे वो successful नहीं रहे, क्यों नहीं थे successful, या आप just go for the results कि इतना ज़्यादा changes नहीं आए when we talk about the exports from India. And if we are relying again on FTAs, so how these FTAs are different from the previous ones, how they can help India specifically at time when we are seeing global level जो demand है that is slowing down. So how we can basically, FTAs can help our export sector. So अभी हम रेलवे स्टेशन की रीडेवलपमेंट की बात कर रहे थे, तो इसके पीछे एम क्या है? So it is being stated by the Union Railways Minister that we want them to have world-class stations without any burden. We have not increased the fare or fixed a fee in the name of station redevelopment. This is one thing, मतलब you can again think about कि क्या possibilities हो सकती है when talking about redevelopment of railway stations, how they can be made modern. What is the idea behind a modern railway station? Then FTA talks, they are also going on with European Union leaders. So first half का जो capital expenditure target है, it was set at rupees 6 trillion. So states and CPSCs, they're also accelerating the capital expenditure. So again, यहाँ पे आपको clarity, firstly, conceptual clarity होना important है between revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. What is the basic difference? And how capital expenditure, it can act like a catalyst in furthering India's, growth 25 years down the line when we are completing 100 years of independence, and we have that vision of being a developed country. So when we talk about the NPAs right now, we are seeing कि according to experts, they are saying कि जो share है willful defaulters का, it seems to be on the rise. So that is one thing. And again, उसको मतलब आपको ट्रेंड के बारे में थोड़ा पता होना चाहिए, what is actually going behind the scenes. ये तो हमें पता है कि NPAs have been falling, but going in that a little bit of details is important to have that level of clarity. So NPAs कैसे reduce हो सकते हैं, किए जा सकते हैं? One is obviously when the borrowers, they pay back the pending amount. Another is by loan write-offs. So around, we're seeing of the rupees 5.9 trillion write-offs in the last 3 years, only 19% has recovered. So that's quite low. And this is mostly on account of erosion of the value of the secured assets, interference from promoters, ineffective enforcement, and realization of securities. So while most of the public sector banks they give out the recovery amount from the write-off, private sector peers, they do not give these numbers specifically, and public sector banks, they have accounted for about 62% of the write-offs in the last 3 years. So अगर हम बोले कि is it being done in a healthy manner, अगर हम reduction in NPAs की बात करें तो no, that is majorly because of the loan write-offs. So that is something which is not sustainable or which is not the first option to be done. Then you can also bring in the role of IBC in reducing the NPAs. And we are seeing that it has not yielded the desired results on account of elongated insolvency resolution process. Matlab time period jo hai of resolution, that's too long, multiple litigations, and then this has led to delay in the successful resolution of the stressed assets. So that is another thing. So India के अगर हम banking sector की बात करें तो it remains on a strong footing. So fundamental analysis is what we are trying to do over here. So economic के भी अगर आप economically Indian economy के fundamentals की बात करें, that also remains quite strong given when we look at the economic situation of the developed countries. So banks, they are likely to witness improvements in return on their assets and return on equity over the next few years. Net interest margins के बारे में आपको पता होना चाहिए. Concept clarity, again, you can just search कि net interest margin का meaning क्या होता है. मतलब that is the way through which banks, they are making money. या banks की जो income generate होती है, that is because of the net interest margins. So asset quality across segments, it continues to remain benign with the credit cost that is not showing meaningful signs of deterioration. And despite higher rates, जो most of the segments हैं, mutual funds की अगर आप बात करें, they have reported a meaningfully benign performance even on asset quality. So capital adequacy ratio की हम बात करें, they are in comfortable position for the banking sector with the tier 1 ratios of banks meaningfully higher than the regulatory requirements. So the banks, they are in a comfortable position as far as the capital adequacy ratios is concerned. So despite seeing a surge in the stock prices over the last 12 to 15 months, the valuations they are largely reasonable at the long-term average. And outlook on the earnings also remains robust. So banks are going to witness improvements in return on assets and return on equities over the next few years. But again, despite the meaningful re-rating over the last couple of quarters, कुछ mid-sized banks ऐसे हैं which we are seeing कि mid-sized banks trade are favored by us. So these have mid-term rate of interest and trade at relatively attractive valuations on the price to book. So challenges की अगर हम बात करें, एक तो हमने अभी यही देखा कि NPAs we were seeing कि share of willful defaulters जो है that is increasing. Coming to Indian Express newspaper, so So advantages क्या है e-invoicing के? This is a very basic thing. We can just go through these bullet points. So to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we are having conference in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, and India's NSA is also present there. So working for a consensus. So NSA Ajit Doval's participation in the peace conference on Ukraine shows India's willingness to step up the efforts to end this war. So the fact it has raised its level of representation up from the secretary rank official reflects the sense of purpose on India's side. And as chair of G20, also India is keen to have a consensus document at the Leaders Summit in New Delhi next month as well. So we need informed citizens for democratic process, coming from the Vice President of India. So he's expressing his anguish over the sinister efforts by some to taint, tarnish, and demean the country's institutions. Vice President, he has asked people to be judgmental about such forces and urged them to not hesitate to neutralize the anti-Bharat narrative. So you'll have to speak out your mind to defeat the sinister forces. So the global way out. What is the global way out? So era of global boiling में अगर हम बात करें, so है you can basically in a way addressing कि global level पे क्या challenges हैं. So challenge can only be met if we are acting in political, economic, financial concert. So life began on Earth around 4.5 billion years ago with a single cell organism, but humans, they have only been around for around 2 lakh years, and that's a mere blip in the evolutionary time span on our planet. So consequence are neural equipment. It has not been able to adapt and change to create a reward system that would encourage pro-environmental policies and behaviors. So it is not clear how such a reward system it can be created, nor how long it might take. So obviously we can't wait for a very long time period, because again we are seeing the impacts of climate change happening and increasing with every single year. So basically, to tackle the climate change, its impact, what political, economic and financial efforts are required. So climate finance की हम बात करते हैं. इसके अलावा वहाँ पे we are obviously that is another challenge also. Economically हमारी policy sustainable होनी चाहिए. Politically भी political cooperation that needs to be visible at the global level. And yeah, that's how basically you can think more about going forward in these three dimensions. So real challenge for the government is to raise the per capita income. So few days back we were going through one data which said that by 2030 India की जो per capita income है that would be able to reach only about $4,000. So that's very less. अगर हम बात करते हैं कि we aspire to be one of the developed countries by 2047. So for that, obviously high income category में enter करने के लिए to be a developed country, हमारी per capita income it should be somewhere between $10,000 to $12,000. But by 2030 we would be reaching $4,000. So obviously there would be a lot of gap. So this is something a little, I can say it's an ambitious target, but again, we need to move in that direction at much faster pace. So politics for politics to jettison the competitive populism. So people have to move from low productivity jobs to high productivity jobs. Now, अब आपको ये सोचना पड़ेगा high productivity jobs कौन से sector में है. Largest segment of India's working population जो है around 45%, that is still engaged in agriculture sector. तो हम कैसे ensure करेंगे कि people move out of agriculture towards manufacturing, towards industries and services. So we need to raise agriculture productivity साथ के साथ and give farmers the access to the best agricultural markets. So agriculture sector पूरा अलग domain हो गया, and this would help raise their incomes also and help Prime Minister Modi fulfill his dream of doubling the farmers' income also, जो target year से obviously miss हो गया. So we'll just also go through the details of it because it's important. Okay, so IMF, it projects that India will be the third largest economy by 2027. So India has registered highest growth rate amongst the G20 countries, surpassing China for 2 successive years. So that's commendable. Given कि जो global challenges हम देख रहे हैं, उस time period पे we have surpassed China for 2 consecutive years. So that's why it is commendable. And Modi government needs to remain focused on the growth like Arjuna's eye while keeping inflation under control. So as per IMF, India, it is currently fifth largest economy with a GDP of $3.7 trillion. USA is at the top with around $27 trillion of GDP, followed by China. China is at $19.4 trillion. So even the gap between India and China is very huge. So third position पे तो आने में हमें इतना time नहीं लगेगा, but then surpassing these two economies, US and China, that is going to take a lot of time. So top 4 countries जो हैं, that is US, China, Japan, and then Germany in terms of GDP, followed by then India at number 5. So 2027 तक India's GDP would be around $5.2 trillion. So USA will be at 31 trillions, China at $25 trillion. So even if we go by the time period जो India को लगा है for coming to the current position, that is also mentioned, like India took 6 decades, means 60 years to cross $1 trillion mark. 2007 में we crossed it. And उसके बाद India just took 7 years to be at $2 trillion of economy. मतलब उसको double करने में we just took 7 years. And it added another $1.2 trillion by 2021. So again, less than a decade we can say. So If India it hits the IMS projected figures of $5.2 trillion by 2027, it would be adding a whooping $2 trillion in just 6 years. So that would be something unprecedented because adding up $1 trillion in 6 to 7 years, this we've already achieved twice. But now adding $2 trillion in 6 years would be something which would be unprecedented and commendable and creating history. So in that would put India firmly on the global stage as well. But अगर हमें real purchasing power of an economy, we have to assess that, and welfare of the country's people. Obviously, that is something which cannot be judged only by looking at the improvement in the GDP figures. We should also look at GDP, per capita GDP in the purchasing power parity, and what a US dollar it can buy in USA is what do we basically mean by GDP in purchasing power parity. So measuring GDP on a PPP basis shows that India already has third highest with a GDP of $13 trillion PPP. So in terms of GDP in PPP, we are third largest at $13 trillion. China is at the top, then we have US. So again, फिर से हम वेलफेयर को मेजर करने की बात करें, क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ को मेजर की बात करने की बात करें, तो वी नीड टू लुक एट द पर कैपिटा जीडीपी इन पीपीपी टर्म्स. So PPP जो conversion ratio, it can vary widely across countries. जो price levels हैं of goods and services, that could differ significantly. Obviously, there is different level of inflation level also. तो अगर हम इंडिया की पर कैपिटा इनकम को कंपेयर करें, दैट इज द लोवेस्ट इन द G20 कंट्रीज, दोनों डॉलर टर्म्स में भी और पीपीपी टर्म्स में भी. सो डॉलर टर्म्स में इंडियाज per capita income is at $2,600. PPP terms में it is at $9,000. And the real challenge India के लिए क्या है is to raise this per capita income of the people. So इसको अगर हमें improve करना है, again we need to ensure कि people are moving out of this low productivity jobs to high productivity jobs. और ये हम already देख चुके हैं, 45% of the workforce is still engaged in agriculture. So agriculture sector में तो improvements चाहिए, ये हम देख चुके हैं कौन से major domains हैं. Agriculture productivity को increase करना, access to agricultural markets, best markets, doubling the farmers' income, and doubling of investments in R&D. R&D के लिए we are working separately, irrigation, rural infra में, liberalizing the agriculture markets. So that's there. And again, we need to also invest heavily in education, skill development of the rural people to build new cities, undertake massive construction activities as well. So urbanization experts, it reminds us that almost 75% of new India, it is yet to be built. 75% is yet to be built. So भारत मंडपम की अगर बात करें, न्यू पार्लियामेंट हाउस की बात करें, तो they are just the beginning of an India story. So it will require new skills. Millions of people, they will have to move from rural to New Delhi, and it will be accompanied by high productivity jobs in manufacturing and services as well. So China followed this developmental path या growth pattern हम बोल सकते हैं. So again, अगर इंडिया को grow करना है sustainable basis पे, so it may have to follow similar path with Indian characteristics. So very, very important. So we need to also work upon abolishing poverty soon as per the Niti Aayog's report. So right now it is at 15%, and that is down from 25%. And only then India can set a real example for the global south as well. So only visible challenge to this, it seems to be our competitive populism in the politics. The रेवड़ी culture की अगर आप बात करें, जो हम revenue expenditure कर रहे हैं, subsidies का expenditure कर रहे हैं, again, that needs to be rationalized. So Supreme Court, yeah, ECI, it needs to check the freebie promises to ensure meaningful democracy. So this is a very, very important article of the day, I can say. And again, you can see कि कैसे पूरी picture emerge out हो रही है when we talk about the economy. क्या चेंजेस किए गए हैं जब हम नॉर्म्स फॉर दी ड्रग्स फर्म्स की बात करें, क्यों चेंजेस किए गए हैं? सो आप यू कैन जस्ट गो थ्रू इट, इसमें इतना एनालिसिस रिक्वायर्ड नहीं है. Full circle on the farm reforms. So again, this is a very important article. Farm laws that try to free agricultural trade. Modi government has reverted to the controls and the curbs back again. So that's why we're saying full circle complete again. So this is pretty much in the lines of an earlier short-lived experiment to decontrol back in 1947. So जो तीन फार्म लॉज आए वो लॉ नहीं बन पाए बेसिकली. It's been 3 years and so जो पहला ordinance आया that was in June, the Parliament September 2020 में. So it was built as the 1991 movement of the Indian agriculture, but again they couldn't be converted into a law. So the basic idea था behind those laws, it was to free the trade in agricultural produce. Farmers के पास choice थी to sell their produce to anyone and anywhere in the country, and they were no longer confined to state government regulated markets. So traders, retailers, जो processors थे वो farmers से directly buy कर सकते थे उनका produce, the one which they were willing to sell. So इस तरीके से there existed basically no barriers for the farmers and even for the market participants. But जो protest देखे गए, again these bills they were withdrawn. So 1947 की बात करें, so the country it had just attained independence. So it had to do with a short-lived experiment at decontrolling of the food grains trade and push for which it came from none other than Mahatma Gandhi. So decontrolling the prices of the food grains या food grain trades. So एक attempt किया गया post independence. So Mahatma Gandhi said that this measure for decontrolling the agricultural trade was to make our life natural. So जो controls impose किए जाते हैं from above, they are always bad, and when they are lifted, so people they will have a feeling of freedom. मतलब आपके ऊपर कोई restrictions नहीं है, कुछ ऐसा नहीं है कि you have to work within this area, this domain, you have to follow these restrictions. So once they are lifted, so it acts like a breather for the farmers and they have that feeling of freedom from within. So Gandhiji, he also advocated for dismantling of the system for food rationing also that was introduced during World War II, starting with the Bombay 1943 May. So then it was extended to large parts of India. So August 1947 तक around 60 million people they were under the direct rationing, getting 10 ounces of cereals per capita per day on an average. So these basically entail both draining of the forex reserves, forced the levy on the farmers, which applied to any production in excess of say 1 ton. So compulsory levies लगाई गई on the controls over the private trade and movement. So not for nothing, the then finance minister R.K. Shanmugam Chetty, he in his budget speech warned of a serious threat of a breakdown of rationing system. So decontrol or rollback की बात करें October 1947 तक Food Grains Policy Committee having three leading industrialists Purushottam Das Thakur Das, Ghanshyam Das Birla and Lala Shriram. They were among its members recommended reduction in India's dependence on food imports as well as cutting down on the rationing. So जो proposal था, it was consistent with the Gandhi's own philosophy of self-reliance. So government must teach people how to face the shortages, how to deal with that situation and work towards increasing domestic production. So 1947 दिसंबर में ही अनाउंस किया गया एक प्रोग्राम by the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, planned gradual and progressive decontrol. So states जो थे they were told to reduce जो rationing committees थी commitments थी in stages, rely on the internal procurement rather than imports to meet any remaining needs. सो लेसन्स की बात करें तो जो 1948 में डी कंट्रोल एक्सरसाइज करने की कोशिश की गई, इट वाज अटेम्प्टेड एट टाइम जब इंडिया इट कुड नॉट प्रोड्यूस इनफ फूड टू फीड अ ग्रोइंग पॉपुलेशन. मतलब उस टाइम पे फूड सिक्योरिटी नहीं थी. इट वाज डेस्टिन्ड टू फेल notwithstanding Mahatma Gandhi's exertions to make our life natural. So Nehru's government tried again during 1952 में भी similar exercise की गई when the good crops that emboldened to relax the movement controls and cut rationing. But late 1950s में it was realized कि decontrol of free trade, it wasn't sustainable for a structurally food deficit country. But आज के टाइम में हम बात करें cut to 2020 when the farm laws they were passed, so these were advertised as giving farmers greater freedom of choice through opening of alternative marketing channels. 1948 में it had now entered a regime of permanent surpluses in most crops with FCI's good downs bursting the streams. So situation couldn't have been riper for decontrol. But again, that couldn't be done because of the withdrawal of those bills because of the farmers' protest. So आज तक जो हम बात करते हैं making life natural, as Mahatma Gandhi he said, that still remains unrealized. So when it comes to food and agriculture की हम जब बात करते हैं तो जो most reformist governments है they tend to develop cold feet, that is reverting to controls at the slightest hint of shortages या price pressures. Modi government has been no exception to this rule. मतलब when we see कि अगर supply shortages हो सकते हैं, prices can increase. So again we come back to imposing restrictions. चाहे आप वो बात करो exports को ban करने की, जैसे हमने राइस और wheat के केस में देखा. तो मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी की बात करें तो why RBI it is expected to maintain status quo. So again ये हम बोल सकते हैं एक फोरकास्ट है या प्रिडिक्शन करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि दिस इज पॉसिबिलिटी, वन ऑफ द पॉसिबिलिटीज कि आरबीआई स्टेटस को मेंटेन कर सकते हैं. सो लेट्स अंडरस्टैंड दिस. सो प्रीवियस टू मॉनेटरी पॉलिसीज में क्या डिसीजंस रहे. सो फर्स्ट वाज इन अप्रैल. सो उसमें यूनानिमस डिसीजन था टू पॉज द हाइक इन द रेपो रेट. एंड अपार्ट फ्रॉम दिस जून में जो पॉलिसी आई उसमें सेंट्रल बैंक इट अगेन लेफ्ट द रेपो रेट अनचेंज. सो लास्ट की जो दो पॉलिसीज रही वहाँ पे रेपो रेट को चेंज नहीं किया गया. सो वी मेंटेन्ड दैट पॉज. एंड आरबीआई गवर्नर अनाउंसिंग जो अप्रैल में पॉलिसी थी it was a pause and not a pivot. So statement he reiterated was the June policy announcement. So the pause tha and it was not a pivot. So why will RBI extend the pause in August? से question उठता है. So again हम यहाँ पे थोड़ा इकोनॉमिक इंडिकेटर्स की बात करेंगे. इकोनॉमिक सिचुएशन क्या है. एनालिस्ट और इकोनॉमिस्ट का कहना ये है कि according to them MPC it will leave the repo rate unchanged with the hawkish guidance. So they say that RBI policy will remain at the same level as far as the policy rates are concerned. And inflation, it is lower than 5% mark. That is one reason. So prices of vegetables, pulses, they will continue to exert upward pressure, but again, that's seasonal. So apart from the vagaries that is arising from monsoon and agriculture related issues, the recent spike dekha gaya international crude oil prices maybe that is also due to supply cuts from the OPEC. So again, वहां से भी we can feel the pressure on inflation. So RBI's move to extend the pause in August policy, it will come at a time when other major central banks जो है दूसरी countries के like USA, European Central Bank, उन्होंने repo rate को increase किया है. So policy stance की बात करें, so क्या RBI इसको retain करेगा कि नहीं करेगा? So we expect the MPC to maintain the withdrawal of accommodation and to stance of accommodative policy. For now, with the system liquidity continuing to be in surplus mode and given considerable uncertainty surrounding the near-term inflation outlook. So surplus liquidity, it is on account of the return of rupees 2,000 banknotes to the banking system. That's why we are seeing surplus liquidity. And yeah, that's the reason. सो लास्ट 7 days की अगर हम बात करें तो जो फॉरेन पोर्टफोलियो इन्वेस्टर्स हैं उन्होंने अराउंड $1 billion पैसा इंडिया की मार्केट से विड्रॉ कर लिया है, बिकॉज यूएसए का जो सेंट्रल बैंक है और यूरोपियन सेंट्रल बैंक जो है उन्होंने अपना इंटरेस्ट रेट हाइक कर दिया है. तो ऑब्वियसली वो लोग सेफर ऑप्शन में इन्वेस्ट करना प्रेफर करेंगे. एफपीआईज की अगर हम बात करें तो ऑब्वियसली ये इंडियन रुपी के ऊपर भी प्रेशर एडअप करता है. एंड अगेन एफपीआई से रिलेटेड कंसर्न्स यही होती है, इसको हम हॉट मनी भी बोलते हैं बिकॉज इट्स वेरी इजी टू इन्वेस्ट एंड देन विड्रॉ योर मनी. सो इंटरेस्ट रेट्स इंडिया में दे हैव मूव्ड इन टैंडम विद द रेट्स इन यूएस. मतलब यूएसए के जो सेंट्रल बैंक का डिसीजन रहता है कहीं ना कहीं वो इंडियन सेंट्रल बैंक के डिसीजन को भी इम्पैक्ट करता है एज फार एज द मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी इज कंसर्न्ड. सो ये भी एक कंसर्न है जो ऑफन इट इज डिबेटेड कि दैट नीड नॉट बी इन सिंक. हमारे लिए इम्पोर्टेंट क्या है, इंडिया की इकोनॉमिक कंडीशन को कंसिडर करना एंड देन जस्ट गो फॉर अदर सेकेंडरी फैक्टर्स बिहाइंड टेकिंग द डिसीजन. सो ये एक नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट होता है कि अगर फॉरेन सेंट्रल बैंक्स अपने इंटरेस्ट रेट चेंज कर रहे तो इंडिया के ऊपर क्या इम्पैक्ट होता है. सो दिस इज वन ऑफ द इम्पैक्ट्स कि एफपीआईज का जो डिसीजन है या तो इंडिया में इन्वेस्ट करना या इंडिया से विड्रॉ करना, क्योंकि जो अमाउंट होता है वो बहुत ज्यादा होता है. तो दैट्स व्हाई एक्सचेंज रेट के ऊपर भी इम्पैक्ट होता है. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Do subscribe to the channel and yeah, hit the like button for the video.